Today I'm going to show you how to remove the seat rails in a 1968 Corvette. You're going to need a ratchet, a 3/8 and a 5/16 socket, a punch, a hammer, a flathead, and something to either drill out or grind off rivets. So you're going to have two 3/8 bolts here. You have one here and one here. Same on the side with the latch to move it. You're going to have a chrome knob here that just spins off and a 5/16 bolt here. So when you take this one off, you're going to have to spin it a little bit because this arch is up. So you're going to spin it to get it out of this hole right here. Alright, now that the seat rail is out, you're going to have two rivets that you're going to need to drill out. One here, which is the back of the seat, and one here in the front. Once you have those two drilled out, you're going to need to slide this all the way, I guess, to the front. You need access to this dimple. So flipping it over, you can see this is the front. You have these divots here, and you need to smack this one so that it's completely flush. You need to do this so that you can get the bearing out. If you're having trouble getting the seat rail to slide forward enough, you can flip it over and you can see in here we have the bearings. You can stick a screwdriver in here and mess with it, try to move the seat rail back and forth, try to move the screwdriver back and forth to see how you're going to be able to get it so you have access to smacking this flush. When I originally did this, I had to use a bunch of PB Blaster, let it sit for a little bit, and just work it back and forth to knock a lot of the rust out. Once you have that smacked all the way flush on the inside, so you want it flush from this side, you're going to work the bearings so that each bearing is as far forward as possible. So we're going to start with it. This is the front of the seat rail. We're going to start with it all the way back. We're going to put our screwdriver in here and try to keep this bearing still while we move the whole seat rail back. And then we're going to do the same thing to the front one, or to this one. So I have the bearings pretty much positioned. The seat rail is all the way back. I'm going to slide it towards the front, and you can see this bearing is going to come out. It usually doesn't come out this easy. We got kind of lucky, but this whole bearing will come out. And then now that you have this back bearing out, you slide it off of the rail. With that one out, you can now just work on pulling this one out the front. You can see it's the same thing if we flip this over. We have the same exact type of bearing. So these divots on the frame rail are to keep the bearing in place. When you have the full seat rail assembled, you can see this thick bearing right here is sandwiched very, very tightly, so it's not going to be able to pass over these bumps. So after you clean up the seat rail, you do need to put rivets back in here before you actually reassemble it. I didn't want to go through the trouble of having to do rivets and smack them and then grind them out every time, so what I did was I made a countersink hole, and I bought some SAE 10, I think these are fine thread, countersunk head, and I'll just put those in there, a little bit of Loctite, and then put a nut on the end of it, and if I ever need to take them apart again, I'll be able to just unscrew it. Also, the reason why you need to countersink them is if you try to use a bolt or something that's not countersunk and completely flat once it's in there, the bearing will get caught up on it, and that's going to cause issues. For reassembly, I'm going to start with the top part. So this part bolts to the car, and this part's going to bolt to the seat. So start with this side. You're starting with the bearing that sits between these two divots, and you're going to flip this over and slide this rail part into this side of the bearing. Getting the two rails lined up is pretty much the hardest part. Once you get these two lined up and you're starting to get this bearing in, I flip it over so that this is now on the bottom, and I use my finger to try to push this bearing in and get everything rolling. Also, when you're turning this, if you do turn it left or right, you can see that there's a lot more play in the bearing on one of the sides. If you're trying to tilt it to get angles to look, try to tilt that towards you, because the top of the seat rail, this is going to have to slide right in between there. So if you have it pushed out at all, or if it's bent just a little bit, it's not going to be able to squeeze through. So I just got this started, and now I'm going to flip it over, and you can see it just slid right in. The part with the latch is a lot harder because you have to deal with the actual latch mechanism, and you have to squeeze by this thick side, but this side's not too hard. So now that you have this back one in, you're going to push the bearing all the way forward, pull the seat track back, and then try to do the same thing. So we're gonna put the bearing in here. We're going to start it, leave just enough room to get this other bearing in there, and now you're gonna just slide the seat rail until it goes in. So now we need to make sure that we have enough room to get to all of the notches in the seat rail. So you might have to adjust the bearings back or forward. And what you're looking for are the notches on the bottom part of the seat rail that bolts to the car. These notches are what the lever is going to grab onto for adjusting the seat. You can flip it over and you can see as we go what spots we can get to. So right here we can get to all of the adjustments. So now that we're done adjusting the bearings, we need to re-divot this right here. So you just take a punch and a hammer and smack it. You don't need a lot, you just need barely enough so that that bearing can't come out. So after you get that divot punched back out again, you might want to recheck to make sure that you can still reach all of the adjustment locations.